No, it's not helpful. All right, gang. We're going to give this a shot one more time for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. This is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude, coming to you this evening as usual. I want to see if we can get everything back up to the way we were here. If you'll give me just one moment, and we'll be all set to go. There we go. I think we got everything set. I want to point out to you, as I'm getting set up, as you can see, we have today our newest newest forum member is Liam94Y01. Welcome to Liam and to all of our new members that have joined since we did the last video cast. Want to apologize for that little involuntary hiatus there. We had a few technical issues that I hope we have finally gotten resolved, and we can move on to bigger and better things. There's been a lot of things going on in the forum in the last few weeks. I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights this evening. I won't go through all of the tips and tricks that I thought I'd be able to squeeze in. A couple of the tips that I'm going to talk about tonight are from the couple of podcasts that I thought we would have been able to get in by now. But they're still relevant. I'm sure some of you may have heard them by now. Some of you haven't, but we'll get to those. And I'm probably going to try to jam as many tips into next week's show as I can. So that one may be a little bit longer than half an hour. All right. As you can see, I'm pulling up my stuff here. I want to get us to a point where these are just a couple. There we go. That's the one I wanted. First of all, I want to thank forum member Rod Sprague, who noticed an increased CPU load after updating to Sierra. And this was kind of interesting because most of us had not noticed, if we had been beta testing, we had not noticed any kind of increased CPU load. And in Rod's case, he was hitting something on the order of 140% CPU load. And he got to investigating, and it was really quite simple. When he started looking, there was one process that was eating up the time, and that process is called Photo Analysis D. And after doing a little bit of Googling, Rod figured out that it's photos running its form of facial recognition for the people view. So that will generally clear itself up once that process is done and it's finished photo recognition. I did not notice this issue when I was doing the beta, but then again, I'm not using facial recognition on a lot of my photos, and I really don't have many photos stored on my Mac anyway, so I probably would not have noticed this. I suspect that the larger your library is, the more people that are involved, the longer it will take for this process to clean itself up and finish. But it does apparently clean up after a bit. Okay, now also, speaking of that, let me get rid of this little one. There are a couple things here that I just want to close out. that are kind of in the way. There we go. Um, longtime forum members will notice that David Pogue has been a good source of information about all things Mac related, and particularly when it comes to tips and tricks for use of the Mac. The particular article that I'm going to link to in the show notes is David Pogue's info on Siri in OS 10, or in Mac OS rather, now that they're calling it that. With the advent of Sierra, you've had the ability to use Siri. And some of you may have noticed, I think it was in one of the podcasts that made it out, where Siri and I had an insult match here a couple of weeks ago, where I basically yelled at it, and then it referred to, and its response was, after all I've done for you, and that proceeded to cause me to start with a fit of laughter for about 10 minutes. But David's article talks about, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, the basic setup for Siri on the Mac, but then it also, and this is the thing that I wanted to let you know, it in there, in addition to how to set it up, he gives you some information about which settings you can change, which programs seem to control better, how to use it to do things like setting an alarm clock, setting alarms, that kind of thing. Longtime Siri users on the iPhone may not find this very helpful because it's very similar in terms of what it can do. But those of you that have not used Siri a lot, or you've had a phone that doesn't really make good use of Siri because of speed and that kind of thing, and may not be available to you, you can look at this, and this will give you a good idea of what Siri can do on the Mac and whether you think it would be a useful thing for you. And I will say this, from the limited testing that I've done with it, when you get Siri to recognize what you want to do and you're used to working with it, I see the performance as being pretty good. I don't see a huge lag with Siri. Now, granted, that's running it on a newer machine. The older the machine gets, the more likely it is that you're going to see some performance issues. But that's something that you're going to have to experiment with for yourself and see if the performance is acceptable to you. On a relatively recent machine, it should be pretty good. It has been for me in the limited amount of testing that I've done with it. I'm kind of looking at this in terms of, can I use Siri in conjunction with the dictation features that have been in the last few iterations of OS X to get rid of a program such as Drag and Dictate. I'm not saying that Dragon is a bad program. I'm simply looking at it in terms of, can I use what's in the OS to do something that I currently use a third-party program to do? And I always look at things that way. That's always the way that I look at it for. What's the advantage of this third-party application compared to what's already available to me in the operating system? All right. So I'm not going to go through in detail about all of those. You can read that for yourself, but you can see it's things like setting alarm clocks, managing contacts, sending text messages, all kinds of things like that, and more I think will become available both as people get used to it and as more apps open themselves up. Now the next tip that I have here, I want to put in because it has to do with Sierra. As you can see, Kurt the iTunes guy is the source of this particular tidbit indirectly. Normally, Kurt has a function in some of his columns called "Hey Apple, fix this," and he didn't put this quite in that category, but it is something that he found annoying. Recently, as is like the very beginning of this month, Apple kind of announced that there's a way in place now for users to download Sierra, to kind of automatically download Sierra. And Kirk does not like that, in part because you still have some people who have metered internet connections, in which case, if you download this installer and you're downloading a lot of other things, you may go over your bandwidth without realizing it, thus costing you money. Also, he points out that some users may not want to upgrade, and because of the bandwidth and the downloading, that's going to cause some issues for some people. Now, this is in part, and Kirk references it in his article, based on an article from Jim Dalrymple at The Loop. And Jim, I have to say, he points out that the downloading of the app is something that can happen in the background. Now, here's the difference between what Apple is doing and what occurs in a lot of Windows 7 setups. Sierra, because of this change in the way Apple is doing things, will automatically download in the background. It does not automatically install in the background. The installer will basically sit there. You still have to tell it to install rather. Now, also, as Mr. Dalrymple points out in his article, there are some situations where the installer will not download. First of all, if you are running low of space on your drive, then the download doesn't take place. Also, if you had a decent amount of space, but then you discover that you are, let's say you download it, but you didn't run the installer right away. And in that intervening time, you discover that you're running low on space. Then the system will delete that installer to give you back that space, to give you that little bit of breathing room that you might need. So it's not an automatic installation. It's not an issue with where it's automatically doing anything other than downloading in the background. Now, for some people, because they are either on a slow or unstable connection, or because of metered bandwidth, they may want to turn this off. And let me show you, courtesy of Kirk McLaren's article, let me show you what you have to do that. As you can see, I've gone into my system preferences, and I am here in the App Store setting. Okay? Now, a lot of times when you go to this, you may have it set where this is locked. I normally do. I just unlocked it this evening because I knew I wanted to show you this. Normally, I have this locked. If this is locked, all of these settings right here will be grayed out. You simply click the unlock button right here, the unlock icon, the padlock, enter your password, an administrative password, and now you can change these settings. As you can see, one of mine here, I have it set to automatically check for updates. And then the second option here says download recent updates in the background. If you don't want it downloading Sierra, go ahead and check this box. Clear this check. Make sure that it's not checked. And you can also clear these about installing updates. In fact, I'm going to change one right now about installing OS updates. I hadn't noticed that I had left that checked because I'm going to tell you, I'm usually the first one to jump on an OS update when it's released, okay? But I don't want it auto-installing for one reason. When an OS is released, a new version, there are times when it takes third-party app manufacturers and developers a few weeks to get on board. And I don't want to be put in a situation where a mission-critical app doesn't work because the developer hasn't updated yet, and I install that update without really thinking about it, and then all of a sudden discover, oh no, I can't run the app that I need to. Even with a clone, going back is going to take some time, and so I want to have control over when I do that installer. That's just me. But I do encourage you, if you're on a metered bandwidth type situation, or you just have a not very stable connection, uncheck this download in the background option as well. Because that's going to stop it from downloading that. Now, you may be wondering, why in the world would Apple have gone to this type of procedure? And I don't know for sure, but I suspect that given what we're seeing in the forum, that what we're running into is an interesting situation. Apple has started a policy with the last few OS updates where when a new version came out, the old version isn't shown in the App Store unless you have previously downloaded it and it's in your purchase history. So, for example, let's suppose that you have not previously downloaded El Capitan, all right? And you go looking, let's say you're on Yosemite or something like that, and you decide, I want to upgrade to El Capitan. You've never downloaded it before. When you go to the Apple Store, to the App Store, you're going to find that El Capitan is not listed in their App Store setup. The one that you're going to see is Sierra. Now, that would be fine if you are willing to go that far. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you're not. You may need El Capitan because something that you have hasn't been cleared yet for Sierra and doesn't work. So this way, with this setup, the user has still has control over the installation, but they have it in their download, they have it in their list, and it's on their drive should they need it. I just wish they'd be a little more vocal about telling you that that's how this works, so that you can then decide if you want to pull that installer off onto a second hard drive or onto a DVD for future use, and not be confused when you see that come up in your download list. All right, now there are because that one was a Sierra tip, I kind of bundled those two together. I want to thank Kirk, the iTunes guy, in his article. He has the link to how to change these settings in system preferences, because I had not thought to look at that until I read his article. But let's get back into the flow of some of the other things that are in there now. Let me bring my Safari windows back up here, and we'll see what we've got. Here we go. The next thing I wanted to mention to you, it comes from a site called PocketLint. Okay, this is a large collection of iOS 10 tips and tricks for users that are running iOS 10 on their iOS devices, on their iPads and iPhones. And there are a number of changes. I linked to the entire article because there are just tips and tricks all over that one. And so here we have, what we have here is some things that you might find very interesting. One of them I want to point out, I had a video of this that I had originally set for last week's show. I can't find it at the moment, but I'll describe it to you, and I'll perhaps reshoot that video and include it in another show. One of the things that has come about because of iOS 10 is the ability to quote-unquote delete some of the apps that you could not delete before. Okay? Now, when I say delete, it's not a delete in the typical sense of the word. Okay? It clears it, and it's not taking up space anymore. But here's the catch. If, for example, let's take the Stocks app on the iPhone, which is one some people might want to delete if they're not managing a stock portfolio. So let's say you want to delete that one. The way that you would do it is to touch that app as you're going to launch it, but touch it and hold it until it starts to wiggle. Okay? Longtime iPhone users will recognize this as the procedure that we used to use for deleting third-party apps. Okay? So once you see that wiggle, you're going to see a small X in the corner of the app. When you tap that X, you're going to get asked if you want to delete that app. And you can pick yes. Now, there are some things that you cannot delete. There are a couple of Apple apps, Apple included apps that you can't delete. One of them being the phone portion, because that's in part the brains of the phone, so to speak. There's some important software there that the phone needs for just very basic operation. So you can't delete that, and there are one or two other things that you can't delete. Most things you can. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that you think carefully about what you delete, and here's why. The procedure to reinstall one of these Mac apps, one of these Apple apps that you used to not be able to delete off your phone, is a little bit different. You can't just go into, like, for example, I have my iPhone backed up on my hard drive. And I have in my media folder, in my iTunes folder, is all of the apps that I have installed. Okay? When I delete those apps from my phone, the backup isn't necessarily there in my apps. What I'm going to have to do to get that back is to go into the App Store, go into the iPhone App Store, and search for that application. Now, I'm not going to have to pay for it again because it was included with the phone, but I am going to have to re-download it. So you do want to be careful and think twice about which ones you include, which ones you don't include. Another one that I'll just briefly mention to you is there are, and in this group of tips, as you can see, it covers most of the major apps, photos. One of the ones that I want to mention is something that I like. I've used this a couple of times and I really like it. Didn't think I was going to, but I do. One of the abilities that the Message app in iOS 10 has is I can be on my phone, I'm sending a message to somebody, and I paste in a link to a web page or a YouTube video or something of that nature. Okay, something media related like that. Now, in the old days, i.e. the pre-iOS 10 days, I would have had to, when somebody sent me a message like that had that link, when I tapped the link, I would have to open Safari or open the YouTube player, whatever application it was that dealt with that link. That's not the way it happens in iOS 10 now. When you get a link like that from someone running iOS 10 and you're running iOS 10, when you look in Messages, a miniature window of whatever that link is going to pop up, and you can watch it right there within the message. So if someone sends you a YouTube link, for example, you can watch that video right there within the message without having to flip to another app. So this cuts back cuts out the need to flip back and forth as you're replying. That's one of the things that I find that I really like. I haven't used it a lot yet, but I like how smooth and seamless that is, and not having to flip back and forth. More and more apps are able to reach out and share directly to messages into Safari, for example. I have an app on my phone called GroupMe, and one of the options that it has, if I select some text in Safari, I can then copy that text, and I used to have to copy and open the window and then open GroupMe and paste it in. Don't have to do that anymore. I can GroupMe as one of the share options. So as this opens up more, you're going to see more and more functionality involved here. Also, last but not least, one of the other things that I want to, just two other things I want to point out to you real quickly. One of them comes from our forum. This is another one from one of our forum members, Patrick. Let me get you to that one first, because that's next in my list. The question came about, how can you delete an email address from the autocomplete list so that that address no longer comes up when you're typing in someone's name to put into an email address? Let's say you have someone that you email regularly, and that person has changed their email address recently. Well, the issue that you may have is that it's still showing the old address, and you have to be careful about picking. Well, that came up in a forum thread, and member Patrick came up with this tip, and I have it here. I have the link in the show notes. The first thing you want to do to get rid of this unused email address is open the Mail app and start a new message. Start to enter the name of the contact that you want to get rid of, okay? Now, start to enter that name. And what you're going to do, you're going to, as this starts filling in, you're going to see a list of suggestions for contacts and their recently used email addresses, just like you can see on the screen here. Now, if you tap the blue circle next to an email address you want removed, this will open up the recent screen, and one of your options is remove from recents, and that's going to get it out of there. Removing it within the Mac Mail program doesn't work, even if you have things passing back and forth between your Mac and your phone. You've really got to go at it this way. And this is done from people, particularly for people who have iCloud accounts. The easiest way to do it is going to be do it on the device by following this procedure. Start that email, tap the little blue icon that appears, and then choose that remove from recents. And that's going to give you the way to get rid of those unneeded email addresses. I thank Patrick for finding that. That's a problem that has plagued a lot of users for a while, and I have to admit I had no clue how to go about doing that. I thought that getting rid of them in your Mac email program would take care of the problem when you synced, and apparently it doesn't. So this is the best way to approach that. And finally, for tonight, I want to point out this article that came from Fox News Tech. This is the tech related news from the Fox News website, and it's how to make an iPhone last longer instead of buying a new iPhone 7. Now, why you would want to forego getting a new iPhone is beyond me. I mean, just, let your old let your old phone run like a piece of junk, and maybe that will convince your spouse that you need a new phone. But that does not work. And to prove to you that that does not work, just in case I was inclined to try that on my phone, on my iPhone 6, My wife found this article on the Fox News tech site, and it talks about how to make your existing iPhone, last longer instead of buying a new iPhone 7. Keyword there being instead of. Apparently, she thought I was going to rush right out and buy a new iPhone. But hey, I've only thrown a couple of hints that direction, you know? But basically, the tips, most of the tips that are on here, I think will make perfect sense to many of you who are longtime iPhone users, but it's worth a read because, first of all, it's a very quick read, and most of the tips are tips that we've discussed in various podcasts over the last few months, but they're consolidated in one place, and you can go through them and kind of see which ones apply to your use and which ones might not apply. For example, one of the things that they suggest is some of the more annoying problems are resolved when you update the operating system. Okay? Sometimes bugs and other quirks that people report are fixed in an update and they've never updated their operating system. Okay? They also mention screen replacement if you got a screen that's cracked. Now, granted, it's going to charge you, you're going to pay something in the three figures, $100 to $200, to get your screen replaced if someone else does it. There are a few places that will do it for a little bit less than that, but whether it's done by Apple or by someone else, you're going to spend roughly between $100 and $200 to get that done. You can get the screen replacement kits for most iPhones for under $30. So if you're a little bit handy with a screwdriver, you can find the directions online for how to make that kind of repair yourself. Some people are going to be comfortable doing that. Some people aren't. Okay? Those are the kinds of things. Expanding storage capacity. Okay? One of the things that you can do, they mentioned taking advantage of iCloud so that you don't have to store as much stuff on your phone. Granted, and they're right, if you have a 16 gigabyte iPhone, you may find yourself running out of space fairly regularly. That's part of the reason that the iPhone 7s are starting with a floor of 32 gigabyte for storage. Okay? A couple of other things that you can do to extend your battery life. You would be surprised how much battery life is eaten by things like having location services on, and by things like if you are consistently in a weak signal area, because the system has to keep searching for a signal, you're going to eat battery life. That check and see. There isn't a setting in the iPhone that can manage that directly very easily, but if you start running into battery issues, that's one thing you probably should take a look at. I'll tell you something else that happened to my wife on her iPhone 3. She had a 3GS, and I sometimes forget that I am the Mac head in the family and that I know some of these little tricks, and she's tech savvy enough that I kind of sometimes assume that she knows this. And about a year, maybe a year and a half after she got her iPhone 3, she started experiencing a battery issue. It was running out of battery far quicker than it should have, given the small number of phone calls she was making. It took me a little bit of thinking and poking, etc., to realize what was happening. She did not realize something, and that was one part of the equation. I did not realize the second part till I did a little bit of research. The part that she did not realize was that these apps, when you switched out of them, didn't close themselves. They basically went into a sleep mode. Now that shouldn't have caused a lot of battery issues because they basically don't use CPU time if they're closed or they're down in the app tray and they're open but they're not being used. Well, here's the one situation where that was not true, and you may run into this on an older phone. If you have opened something that updates for live data, like a weather application or the stock application, when that thing is in the tray, depending upon how it's set, even though you're not looking at it, it may still be burning battery time because it's going periodically to look for updated information. Another one is if you've got mail turned on and you've got mail set to push. Okay, essentially mail means, push mail essentially means that the server is going to push that mail message down to you whenever one is on the server that you don't have on your phone. That's great if you like keeping in touch with your email, but it does involve burning some battery because let's say that you have it set manually and you check every maybe 3 or 4 times a day. That means it's only burning that connection time however many times you check. But if you've got it set to push mail, then it's going to connect multiple times a day. There's going to be something being transferred between your phone and the server. And if you get a lot of email in a day, okay, that can be an issue. So this is a good article for that kind of thing. It involves mostly common sense things, but especially if you are relatively new to the iPhone, give this a read. It's not a highly technical type of argument. You can breeze right through it in a matter of a couple of minutes, and there's some pretty good information there. I want to kind of close the note on that one. I'm not trying to discourage you from purchasing an iPhone 7, but this is something that I think you always need to do with these iOS devices is understand how they're running, because sometimes the complaints that people have boil down to, I expected it to behave one way, it's actually behaving in another way, and the way in which it's behaving is not what I expected. So I want you to go ahead and take a look at that. That'll give you some things to chew on in the coming week. And that's going to just about do it for me this evening. I apologize for being a couple of minutes late getting started. We ran just a couple minutes past the 30-minute point, but hope you enjoyed it. We'll try to squeeze in more tips and tricks next week. Until then, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, a.k.a. Sly Dude. I'll see you in the forum, and if you got anything that you want to be sure that I include in the next show, put it in the forum. A good place to put it is there is a thread in the community announcement section with the Sunday chat information in it, and I always check that thread. So if you got a comment or something that you'd like for me to add, please post it there, and I'll be glad to look into it. Until next week, have a great week, guys.